The iron wind began before sunset, tearing the sky into red threads and stitching them back with grit. Rowan Hale had seen storms on a dozen work moons, but Kesh Seven's dust had a way of biting through seals like it had opinions about soft things. He was 3 hours off shift, boots scuffed, palms nicked from coaxing a stubborn loader into life, when he heard the sound. Not a cry, not quite. A small, pebbled chirr like rain caught behind glass. The basin behind the abandoned smelter yawned open, a bowl of wire skeletons and dented drums. Rowan dropped from a laddered catwalk, felt rust groan under his weight, and followed the sound past a tumble of heat-warp ducting. There, tucked in the lee of a cracked slag chute, curled 5 small bodies, all trembling. Ori hatchlings. He knew them from posters around port, not rare, not common either. Blue and amber fur that would silver as they matured, long ears veined, with faint luminescence, like star maps folded thin. Their eyes weren't open wide with terror, just dry and to steady. As if terror had run out of water. The wind flexed. Grit rattled against his visor. Rowan crouched, heart doing a slow, heavy thing. Someone had left them here. Not even a box, just a ring of broken couplers, like a fence made by a tired mind. He looked up, on the ridge line, a trio of silhouettes, watched, cloaks snapping. When he raised a glove in question, they turned away, faces hooded against the storm. One tossed a handful of white powder into the air. The gesture had the rhythm of a blessing, or a shrug. Rowan swallowed the words that tried to climb his tongue. The smelter's exhaust pipes still breathed the day's heat that would keep the worst of the cold off them tonight, maybe, but the dust would scour their lungs. The storm would dig into their ears and nest there. They wouldn't last. He thumbed his suit's external speaker. "Hey, little starlets," he said softly. "Bad place to nap." Yeah, they didn't answer, obviously. One hiccuped. Another pressed its head under a sibling's belly to hide from the grit. He checked his pack. No incubator. No med gel for Ori systems. 2 water vials, a thermal tarp, 3 patch squares. A hand lamp, not nothing. Not enough. Rowan glanced at the ridge again. Empty now. The ritual was done, whatever it had meant to the ones who left. This wasn't a market scene or a shouted bargain like he'd witnessed on other worlds. This felt like a decision burned down to a coal and set aside to cool. All right. He told the wind more than himself. We'll figure this out. He anchored the tarp between a bent support beam and the lip of a cargo crate, angling it to cut the gale. He slid in on his knees, body forming a wall, and reached for the closest hatchling. It flinched, a tiny hiss of breath, but didn't bite. Rowan cupped it to his chest, heat exchanger humming. The little body was light as a glove. "I'm nobody's savior," he whispered, because saying it made it easier to act. "I'm just here, and here is sometimes enough." He set the first against the warm lining of his suit, zipped the flap to cradle it. The second and third he wrapped together in a patch square and tucked under his left arm. The fourth he settled between his thighs, a tunnel of legs blocking the dust. The fifth smallest, with ears that quivered like moth wings, he kept in his hands, his thumbs resting where its ribs rose and fell. By the time he'd made the little fortress, the sun had slid to a thin coin in the grit. Rust sang in low drags over the scrap above the tarp's edge. The world went red, then purple, then iron. A lamp flicked on nearby, soft and steady. Rowan turned, squinting through grit-streaked glass. She stood at the tarp's edge, her own cloak drawn tight. Barrelin, he guessed, mauve-gray skin dusted with cooler freckles at the temples. Eyes large and copper-bright under a clear visor. Her hair, if it was hair, hung in braided tendrils, each loop banded with woven fiber. The badge on her collar wasn't a rank. It looked like a guild mark, 3 crescent nests in a circle. "You're shielding them wrong," she said, voice low so the wind wouldn't steal it. "The dust finds seams." "May I?" Rowan shifted aside instantly. "Please." She moved with the kind of careful that made you think she did everything to a steady drum. She slid into the tarp space, her body a second windbreak, and folded herself around the hatchlings without dislodging his clumsy arrangement. Her hands were gentle and quick, palpating ears and bellies, checking for grit, for cold, for later problems. "Senka," she said, almost as an afterthought. Rowan, he answered. She nodded. Eyes already on the small lives. The guild says the smelter basin isn't our business. The ones who left them here chose Skylot. If they live the night, the sky chose them. If they don't, she didn't finish. Maybe she didn't agree. Maybe she was just telling the weather inside their world. Rowan didn't try to argue. What do you need? A heat buffer we can trust, she said, and a story that keeps us awake. He handed over his second water vial. I have one of those. Both, I mean, the buffer is me. The story is ordinary, but it will do, she smiled without showing teeth. Ordinary keeps things alive. Wind shivered the tarp. He pressed his shoulder into the support beam. She leaned into the opposite brace. The hatchlings settled by degrees. A sigh, a deeper breath. A small foot pressing absently against his suit's seam. The smallest moth ear blinked up at him, with eyes like fresh slate, and then, to his surprise, butted its head against his thumb the way a tired child might bump a familiar doorframe. Rowan told his story in the pauses between gusts. Nothing heroic. Towns strung along launch rails. A sister who kept bees inside a dome and swore the hum made her smarter. The way the work rings blinked like necklaces when seen from station windows. At night, no battles. A litany of small continuings. Sanka added edges to it with her own. She spoke of hatchery mornings, the precise quiet of taking temperatures before even thinking a thought. A local superstition about whistling under scaffolds, the way Ori adults, once they unfurled, would follow a person with food until you laughed yourself sore. Her guild had rules about intervention, she said. Not unkindly, but in the language of resource accounting. When markets crashed and minerals dried up, hatcheries took the brunt. I don't think the ones on the ridge were cruel, she said, using the tip of her little finger to wipe grit from a tiny nose. I think they calculated, and then they wanted the sky to sign their math. And you? Rowan asked. She lifted her gaze. Copper caught lamp glow. I don't need a signature to hold something warm. The storm thickened. Grit turned to a fine, almost oily dust that found every seam. Like she'd warned, they adjusted the tarp line twice. Once the support beam creaked, and both of them braced against it with their backs. Bodies suddenly the only architecture holding. Their thighs touched, then didn't. Then did again without apology. Warmth moved between their layers like something with good manners, knocking before entering. The first trouble came near midnight. The third hatchling, the one with a faint scar above its eye, began to breathe too fast. Chest fluttering, Sanka pressed her ear to its side. Eyes narrowed. Dus, in the ear canals, she murmured. They don't have the curl yet to deflect it. Do you trust me? Yes, Rowan said, surprising himself with how quickly the word arrived. She unhooked a braided loop from her hair. Inside it, folded and sealed, lay a strip of soft mesh and a tiny ampoule. She snapped the ampoule, and a scent like rain in. Dried herbs lifted. She wrapped the mesh around her smallest finger, touched it to her tongue, and then, very gently, cleaned the little one's ear canals. Each touch careful enough to make time slow. The hatchling stiffened, then softened, breath easing. Good, she whispered to it, as if she'd heard a specific answer. Rowan felt something unfurl in his chest that wasn't desire. Not yet, but knew the path. Love, he thought suddenly, had many first shapes. Sometimes it looked like a mesh-wrapped fingertip, and the patience not to hurry. The second trouble came closer to pre-dawn. The tarp had iced on its outer skin. The wind had gone from teeth to knuckles. His left calf cramped without asking permission. Sanka noticed his jaw harden and pressed a palm to the knot. Through his suit. Breathe into that, she said, not past it, into it. He did. The muscle loosened, not because he was strong, but because someone saw it and nothing else in the universe demanded to be seen more. You're good at this, he said. At tending, she tilted her head. At noticing, you, too, he laughed. Softly, that wasn't how my last boss described me. Bosses love storms and steel, she said. They don't always love people. I count it lucky that I found one who loved both. An old tender named Aerith. When I was new, I tried to fix everything at once. Aerith said, choose a small circle and keep it warm. I've been doing that ever since. Small circle, he echoed. He looked down at the ring of couplers, now repurposed by accident into a boundary for their small world. This one, for tonight. She said, tomorrow, we choose another. They fell quiet. Not because silence demanded it, but because quiet sometimes feeds the same thing stories do. The hatchlings slept more truly now, bodies heavy with the kind of rest that doesn't bargain. Moth ear had shifted to lie along Rowan's forearm, a warm way he didn't know he needed. The wind's edge softened by a breath. Dawn wasn't close yet, but it had started thinking about them. If they live, Senka said, voice almost lost in the hush, they'll need placement. My guild will argue. The market will have opinions. I don't want to fight a wall with my head, but I will if the wall is the thing that needs moving. The tide always arrived with a song, not music the way humans carved it, but a layering of rhythm, water knocking roots, crabs ticking their shells against stone, fronds sighing as currents combed them. Naima Javed had spent 6 months charting Selu's inner reefs, and she still woke each morning in her stilted hut feeling the tune pressing through the wood. As if the sea itself was rehearsing, that morning the song cracked. Instead of the usual clean sweep, she heard a stutter, a snag like something soft caught on a hook. She rose, padded barefoot to the edge of the dock, and peered down through the silver-blue brackish water. The net was ghost pale, almost invisible against the silt. Her lamp beam picked out tangled bodies, pearlback skiffins, no bigger than her wrist, thrashing in weak jerks. Their shells gleamed faintly, opalescent, light scattering in rainbows even as they struggled. Hatchlings, damn, she whispered, pulling her braid over her shoulder. Nets weren't uncommon. Trawlers from off-world colonies left them behind, mesh built to last centuries. They sank, draped across reefs like curses, snaring whatever dared to grow. Naima reached for the hook pole. She was halfway to levering the net up when a shadow rose from below, fluid and certain. A figure surfaced, water sheeting off scaled shoulders, hair braided with shells that clicked as he shook them. Free, his eyes glowed faintly green, as though they had swallowed part of the reef. Don't, he said, voice still carrying saltwater rasp. Naima froze, pole balanced against her shoulder. Don't free them. He rested one webbed hand on the dock. Not like that. You'll tear their gills. Naima blinked, then let out a breath. You've done this before, I guess. The stranger hauled himself onto the dock in a clean flex of muscle. Water spilled from him, pooling around bare feet that clung like suction cups to the planks. He was Thalison, no doubt, sea-born, part of the fisher clans who claimed the mangroves. His presence here meant she'd stepped into someone else's home without asking. Iron of the Shoals. He introduced, matter of fact. Naima, she said, offering a hand without thinking. When he touched it, his palm was cool, ridged, faintly as though the ocean had carved its own signature there. Show me your knife, he said. She produced the dive blade from her belt. He weighed it, nodded once, then slipped back into the water. Naima followed, mask snug against her face, fins slicing in short kicks. Below, the ghost net lay sprawled over a coral shelf, choking it. Pearlback hatchlings twitched against threads that cut deeper the more they fought. Iron moved with a practiced rhythm, sliding the knife through mesh and angles that loosened without jolting. Naima mirrored him, though slower. Each time she cut, she cradled a hatchling in her palm until it calmed, then guided it free. 20 minutes later, the last one swam off in a flash of light, rejoining its siblings in a loose swirl. The reef seemed to sigh, polyps opening as if relieved. They surfaced, pulling onto the dock together. Naima was breathless, grinning despite salt stinging her lips. That was work, Iron said flatly, wringing water from his braid. She frowned. And you do this often, too often. He sat cross-legged, watching the hatchlings dart below. Nets drifting on every tide. If we don't cut them, the reef empties. And when the reef empties, the clans starve. Naima studied him. His shoulders carried the kind of tired that wasn't from one night. So why keep doing it? His gaze flicked to her. Because I still want to eat. Because I still want to hear song in the tide. Because if I don't, the hatchlings die. Simple truths. No embellishment. They sat in silence, water dripping between planks. Naima felt the pulse of the ocean through the wood again. Steadier now. Let me help, she said at last. Run gave her a long look, measuring. You're an uplander, and uplanders draw maps. Lines on paper don't feed hatchlings. Naima met his gaze without flinching. My maps mark where the nets drift, where the currents choke. If you know where to swim, you save time, maybe lives. For a moment, his lips tightened, almost a smile. Maybe. They began working together without naming it partnership mornings. Naima traced channels through the mangroves, sketching with waterproof ink. Afternoons, she met Iron at the dock, and they cut nets, freed hatchlings, and patched corals with resin kits. She learned his rhythms, how he sang under his breath while swimming, low notes that matched the current's pulse, how he always tested each mesh strand before cutting, as though asking permission. He learned hers, how she hummed when drawing maps, steady as the tide, how she paused before choosing paths, waiting for the water to reveal what it hid. One evening, after a long dive, they lay on their backs on the dock. The sky was streaked with silver clouds, and stars blinked faintly against dusk. The hatchlings they'd saved that day flickered below, light flashing like sparks. "Do you ever wonder why uplanders come here?" Iron asked suddenly. "To measure. To sell knowledge back to worlds that never touch salt." She paused. "For me, because the sea doesn't lie. Every current shows itself if you wait." He turned his head, studied her profile. "You're different." She laughed softly. "Uplanders say that about thousands too." Iron rolled onto his side, propping his head on one hand. "When you freed the smallest skiffin today, you held it like you thought it mattered." "It did," she said simply. Their gazes held, salt-stung and steady. Something passed between them. Wordless, like the tide shifting, trouble came with the new moon. The tide dragged in not one net, but a whole snarl of them knotted, barbed with hooks heavy with debris. Worse, the skiffin shoal had chosen that reef to cradle their next clutch. The hatchlings writhed in dozens, pale light shimmering through strands that cut deeper with every thrash. Iron cursed. Diving without hesitation, Naima followed, knife flashing. They worked frantically, cutting, freeing, but the nets were too many, the current too strong. One hatchling snagged near a jagged coral. Iron lunged, knife sawing through, but the net whipped in the current, slicing his arm. Blood spiraled into the water. The hatchling darted free, but Iron faltered, hand going limp. Naima grabbed him, heart pounding. She pressed her palm to his wound, salt stinging her skin. With her other hand, she slashed at the last threads until the hatchling swam off. They surfaced gasping. Iron half limp against her shoulder, on the dock. She tore her mapping cloth into strips, binding his arm tight. "You could have," she started, voice breaking. "Lost more than blood?" He finished, teeth flashing faintly in a grim smile. "Better me than them." Her throat tightened. "Don't say that. Not like it's nothing." He caught her wrist with his good hand, firm. "Then make it something. Keep mapping. Keep cutting." Her breath hitched. The tide below sang louder, as though agreeing. The days after blurred into rhythm again, but sharper, closer. Naima drew maps not just for herself but for him, marking each path with care. Iron let her check his bandages daily, the simple touch weaving quiet threads between them. They spoke less of nets and more of small things, the taste of salt fruit roasted over fire, the way crabs hummed at night, the old songs his clan used to sing when weaving nets for fishing rather than killing. One night, as rain pattered on the mangroves, they sat inside her hut, the air thick with steam from boiling herbs. Iron watched her pour tea, his eyes softer than the tide. "Naima," he said quietly, "do you ever plan to leave?" She hesitated. "I thought I would. Uplanders don't stay." But now, she met his gaze. "Now I don't know." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, ridged skin against smooth. "Then stay," he said. The words settled like an anchor, not heavy, but grounding. Outside, the tide carried its song. Steady and true, their work never grew easier, but together, it grew lighter. Hatchlings survived, reefs healed. The maps spread through Iron's clan, guiding others to clear nets before the tide claimed more lives. And each night, when the sea sang them to sleep, Naima and Iron found themselves listening not just to water, but to each other's breathing, steady as the tide. The pups had grown in ways I hadn't expected. It had only been 3 cycles since I first pried them from the rusted cage near the food stalls. 3 cycles since I held them against my chest while furious vendors shouted about spoiled meat. They were no longer the trembling, half-starved creatures that pressed their tiny heads under my arm. Now they bounded across the floor of my quarters like living sparks, claws clicking on the plating, ears too large for their heads flopping as they wrestled. Their coats shimmered with faint bioluminescence, blues and greens pulsing softly as they played. I had never seen anything quite so alive, and every time one of them glanced up at me for eyes wide, tongues lolling in ridiculous joy, I felt something shift deeper inside. Not pity, not obligation, something heavier, warmer, far more dangerous. When word spread through the station that I had taken the creatures in, whispers followed me down the corridors. They're feral. One worker muttered while hauling crates. They'll turn on him once their teeth sharpen. Another replied. Some insisted the pups carried parasites. Others that their species had been marked for extermination generations ago. None of it mattered. I had seen them blink open those luminous eyes. The first night, seen them curl against me, their breathing synchronized like the tide. They weren't monsters, they were children. But the galaxy doesn't forgive kindness easily. The station's overseer summoned me to shifts later. His office overlooked the docks where freighters lumbered in and out, their hulls groaning. He didn't look up when I entered. Instead, he flicked a data slate across the desk. The report glowed in harsh red letters: possession of restricted fauna, violation of Sector Code 40-429, penalty, termination, or confiscation. You know what this means, he said finally. His voice was measured, but his eyes, those cold metallic implants, gleamed with irritation. They were going to roast them. Alive, I replied. That isn't the point. He tapped the slate. They are classified dangerous. You keeping them only complicates matters. They're infants. I said, they need care, not a pyre. His expression hardened. You will surrender them, or the authorities will do it for you. That night, I sat on the floor while the pups curled in a heap against my legs. Their tiny pulses warmed the fabric of my trousers. One of them, smaller than the rest, nudged my hand until I scratched behind its frilled ears. Its glow brightened, rippling shades of turquoise. They trusted me completely, and I realized then, giving them up was impossible, even if it meant painting a target across my own chest. I began planning. Smugglers passed through the station all the time. Shadowed figures with ships unregistered by any patrol. Some owed me favors from past repairs. If I could barter passage, I might carry the pups somewhere safe, an unclaimed moon, or even a remote sanctuary rumored to harbor exiled species. But moving them was perilous, already. Dock patrols eyed me too long, already. Markets hummed with gossip about the fool human harboring vermin. Every misstep tightened the net. The pups seemed oblivious. They wrestled, tumbled, squeaked at shadows. They grew stronger, sharper, their teeth tiny shards of pearl. Sometimes I caught glimpses of what they would become: swift predators, muscles, coiling under luminous pelts. But when they toppled into my lap with whines, demanding belly rubs, I knew their strength would never turn on me. Not unless someone forced it. The crisis struck sooner than I expected. Returning from the cargo bay, I found my door forced open. Inside, drawers overturned, bedding shredded, the air reeking of antiseptic, and the pups gone. A sound tore from my throat. Half roar, half plea. I stumbled through the wreckage, calling their names, though I had never truly given them any. Only nicknames, sounds of affection. Silence answered. Then dash a faint yelp, muffled, from below. I bolted down service ladders, following the echoes until I reached a waste chute chamber. There, 3 station guards clustered around a sealed crate. Inside, I heard frantic scratching. Step away, I ordered, fists clenched. They sneered. Orders are orders, containment for disposal. Something inside me snapped. The fight was messy, graceless. I wasn't a soldier, but desperation lends strength. I slammed one guard into the wall, ducked a baton strike, drove my elbow into another's gut. Sparks lit the chamber as weapons clattered. Someone shouted alarms. By the time reinforcements arrived, the crate was open and the pups clung to me, whimpering, their light dim with fear. We ran. Corridors blurred. Shouts rang. Behind us, the pups scrambled over my shoulders, claws pricking but never piercing. I knew we couldn't escape forever. The overseer would flood every passage, lock down the docks. But then a miracle, a cargo pilot, scales glinting bronze under the hangar lights, beckoned me toward his freighter. We had traded favors once. I had patched his hyperdrive when others refused. You owe me nothing, I panted. But I need out now. His gaze flicked to the pups, then back to me. For a heartbeat I thought he would turn away like the rest. Instead, he lowered the ramp. Get in before I regret it. The freighter shuddered as it tore from the docks. Station alarms wailed, lights chasing us into the void. I held the pups tight, their bodies trembling, glowing faintly against my chest. For the first time since that cursed market stall, I allowed myself to breathe. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would not let them live so easily, and I had chosen to stand against it. The freighter rattled as it tore free of the station's orbit, every bolt in the hull groaning like a beast under strain. I crouched in the corner of the cargo bay, the pups pressed tight against me, their glow pulsing faintly with every rise and fall of my breath. The pilot hadn't said a word since launch. He worked the controls in silence, scales shimmering bronze beneath the dim lights. From the way his frilled crest twitched, I knew he was calculating risk with every passing second, risk to his ship, his livelihood, and maybe even his life for sheltering me. When at last he spoke, his voice was low. You've doomed yourself, human. Maybe me, too. I met his eyes. They would have killed them. His crest twitched again. He let out a long hiss, then turned back to the controls. Then pray their lives are worth what's coming. The what's coming arrived faster than I expected. By the time the freighter cleared the last debris field, pursuit lights flickered on the scanners. Sleek patrol craft, their engines sharp as knives, were already streaking after us. The pilot slammed the throttle. Hold them tight, the pups whimpered, claws digging into my jacket. My arms wrapped instinctively round them as the freighter pitched, engines roaring. Space spun outside the viewport in violent streaks, stars bending as we twisted into evasive maneuvers. Blasts rattled the hull, warning klaxons wailed. My heart slammed against my ribs in rhythm with the pounding of the pups' tiny hearts. We should have died there, burned to ash in the void. But the pilot's hands never faltered. He guided the ship into a collapsing debris cloud, jagged hull fragments tumbling like broken teeth. The patrol craft hesitated, wary of collision. And in that hesitation, the pilot drove us into a blind jump. Darkness swallowed us. When I woke, the freighter floated in the silence between stars. The pilot sat slumped at the controls, crest drooping. With exhaustion, he didn't look at me as he said, "We're beyond their patrol nets for now." For now, I echoed. The pups stirred, pressing wet noses against my palm. They weren't safe, not really. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The overseer wouldn't stop. The law wouldn't forget. We were fugitives now. The question was, where could fugitives go? The pilot had one answer. There's a world, he said after some time. Out beyond the mapped lanes. No patrols, no markets. Just old forests, oceans, ruins. Few dare land there. Why? I asked. He hesitated, crest flickering. Because it was burned. Once. During the cleansing wars, nothing left worth saving. At least, that's what they say. My gaze drifted to the pups. One yawned, showing tiny teeth that glimmered faintly under its glow. Then maybe it's the only place worth trying. The pilot sighed. Fool human. But he set the course anyway. The journey stretched for cycles. I filled the time caring for the pups, feeding them from ration packs, cleaning their messes, playing with scraps of fabric until they collapsed in exhausted heaps. They grew bolder, bounding across the bay with reckless energy, their bioluminescence brightening in colors I hadn't seen before. One pup, the smallest, began mimicking my gestures. When I raised a hand, it raised its paw. When I whistled, it tried to echo the sound in a high-pitched chirp. I laughed despite the gnawing tension, and for a brief moment the cargo bay felt like a home rather than a prison of metal walls. But every time the scanners beeped phantom signals, echoes, or maybe patrol craft trailing us, my chest tightened. I couldn't shake the fear that the galaxy itself was hunting us. At last, the world appeared through the viewport, a scarred sphere, its surface mottled with blackened swaths where cities once stood. Oceans glimmered under fractured clouds, vast and restless. The pilot set us down in a clearing where twisted trees clawed at the sky. The air outside was thin but breathable. As the ramp lowered, the pups bounded out eagerly, paws sinking into soft earth for the first time. Their lights danced like willow, the wisps among the shadows. I stepped after them, and for the first time in cycles, I felt ground beneath my boots. We built a camp among the ruins. The pups explored endlessly, chasing insects, tumbling through grass that had forced its way back through cracked stone. Sometimes their glow lit up carvings etched into the ruins, symbols of a civilization long gone. I spent hours wandering, trying to imagine who had lived here, who had lost it all. The thought haunted me, entire species wiped away, called dangerous. Just as the pups were now, perhaps the galaxy hadn't changed at all one night. As I watched the pups curl together beneath a collapsed archway, the smallest lifted its head and patted to me. It pressed its forehead against my chest, glowing, brighter than ever. I wrapped my arms around it, and in that warmth, I knew with certainty I wasn't their rescuer anymore. I was theirs. But peace never lasts. The first sign came in the form of smoke trails. Streaking the horizon, I spotted them while scavenging for supplies, 3 ships cutting through the atmosphere, their engines burning white. Patrols had found us. I ran back to camp, heart hammering. The pups sensed my fear instantly. They crowded at my legs, ears flat, lights dimming. I grabbed what little I could carry, shouting to the pilot, "They're here," he cursed, crest flaring. "We can't outrun them this time." The ships roared closer, weapons gleaming. I made a choice then. The pups couldn't die here. Not like this. If the galaxy wanted me, it could take me. But not them, never them. Take the ship, I told the pilot, shoving the pups toward the ramp. They resisted, whining, claws scraping the dirt. My throat burned as I forced myself to keep pushing. Get them away from here, far away. The pilot's eyes widened. "And you?" "I'll distract them." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between us. Then he nodded, sharp and grim. He scooped up the pups, hissing as their claws tangled in his scales. The ramp sealed shut behind them. I stood alone as the ships descended, the ground trembling under their engines. Dust swirled around me. My hands shook, but my resolve did not. If this was the price of saving them, then I would pay it. The patrols landed in a storm of fire and steel. Soldiers poured out, weapons trained on me. Their leader stepped forward, visor gleaming. "Where are the creatures?" he demanded. I met his gaze, heart steady despite the fear gnawing at my gut. "Gone," I said. "Far from your reach." His visor tilted, considering me. Then he raised a hand. The soldiers closed in, but before they could strike, the sky itself screamed. A roar split the heavens, deeper and wilder than any engine. Lights flared among the clouds, not the cold white of patrol craft, but something raw, alive. The ground shook as shadows swept across us. The soldiers faltered, weapons lowering. And then I saw it. Vast shapes unfurling wings that glowed the same bioluminescent hues as the pups. Not one, not 2 dozens, circling, their cries echoing. Across the ruined world. The patrol leader froze. Impossible. I understood then. This planet wasn't burned empty. It was their home. The pups' kin had survived, and they had come for me. The patrol scrambled to retreat, but it was too late. The great beasts descended in a storm of wings and light. I should have been afraid. Instead, I stood rooted, awe flooding through me. One of them landed before me, eyes vast and glowing. Its presence overwhelming. It lowered its head until its brow touched the ground at my feet, a gesture of recognition. My breath caught. The pups hadn't just survived, they had led me back to their people. And now their people were claiming me, too. The beasts circled above like constellations torn loose from the heavens. Their wings beat thunder into the ruins, stirring clouds of dust and broken ash. The patrol soldiers scattered, firing upward in panic, but their weapons were toys against creatures that had endured centuries of fire. I stood frozen as one of the giants lowered its head, its eyes glowing in mirrored hues of the pups I had saved. For a heartbeat, I saw both worlds overlapped, the trembling infants curling in my jacket, and the towering guardians, who now bent toward me in silent acknowledgement. The patrol leader barked orders, but his voice broke when the beasts roared again. They swept down in a wall of light, driving the soldiers back to their shuttles. Metal screeched, engines whined, and in minutes the patrols fled the skies they had once claimed. Silence fell, broken only by the beat of wings as the creatures circled lower, settling among the ruins, and then, out of the freighter, the pups tumbled down the ramp. They squealed with joy, glowing brighter than ever as they bounded toward the giants. One of the beasts bent down, and the pups leapt into its feathers without hesitation, their tiny bodies vanishing against luminous down. My chest tightened, tears burning behind my eyes. They had found their kin. They didn't need me anymore, but the truth proved stranger. When the pups were safely nestled among the giants, one of the creatures turned back to me, slowly, with grace that shook the air itself. It lowered its massive claw. The talons stopped inches from my chest. Waiting. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. My hand trembled as I reached out. Against all reason, against every story the galaxy told about their kind, I pressed my palm into that scaled skin. Heat surged through me, fierce, steady, alive. Images flooded my mind, flashes of memory not my own. Forests burning, eggs smashed, nests torn apart by soldiers and polished armor. Then another memory, me, kneeling in a filthy market, breaking a lock, lifting pups from a cage. The beast's voice wasn't words but emotion, pulsing through my bones. You are ours now. The days that followed blurred into something dreamlike. The beast's guardians, as I came to think of them, led us deeper into the wild lands of their world. They moved with reverence around the ruins, as if the broken stones were gravestones. The pups thrived among them, their bioluminescence blooming in colors richer than ever. Yet they never strayed too far from me. At night, while the giants kept watch, the pups still curled against my side, glowing softly in the dark. The pilot, ever skeptical, muttered constantly, "You've tied yourself to an extinction. When the galaxy finds them again, nothing will save you." Maybe he was right, but every time a pup pressed its forehead against mine, every time a guardian dipped its wing in greeting, I knew the truth. Saving them had saved me, too. Peace lasted less than a season. The patrols returned not with 3 ships, but with a fleet. Burned into the sky like a scar, they descended in formation, their engines a roar of law and vengeance. Word of survival had spread. The overseers would never allow an outlawed species to rise again. The guardians gathered. Wings spread across the horizon. The ground shook with their growls. But against orbital bombardment, even they could fall. I stood at the center, the pups huddled at my legs. My body shook, not from fear alone, but from a terrible clarity. The war wasn't about to begin. It had never ended. That night, the smallest pup climbed into my lap, glowing faintly. Its eyes locked on mine, and in that gaze, I felt the same current I had touched when I pressed my hand to the guardians. Claw, not words, but meaning. Help us, lead us. I broke then, not into despair, but into resolve. Maybe I wasn't a warrior. Maybe I wasn't a leader. I was just the fool who once risked a hand in a marketplace. But if that single act could change the path of a species, then maybe my next act could do more. I rose and faced the pilot. "Get me aboard their flagship." He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "That's suicide." "Maybe," I said, "but better my life than theirs." The infiltration was madness. Under cover of the Guardians' aerial battle, the freighter darted through fire, slipping past shields to dock on the flank of the flagship. I moved through its corridors like a shadow, carrying nothing but a pack of scavenged charges and the weight of 1,000 glowing eyes, watching from the planet. Below, when I reached the command deck, the overseer was waiting, the same man who had once ordered me to surrender the pups. His metallic implants gleamed cruel under the lights. "You should have died with them," he sneered. "Maybe," I said, "but I didn't." He raised his weapon. I hurled the charges. The deck erupted. When I came to, alarms blared. Smoke poured through broken walls. The flagship listed, flames eating its spine. The overseer was gone, dead or scattered into the void. I staggered back to the freighter. The pilot hauled me aboard, cursing in disbelief. We tore away just as the flagship exploded in a bloom of light. Fragments raining across the upper atmosphere. The fleet faltered. The Guardians surged. For the first time in centuries, the invaders broke. When we landed, the pups rushed to me, glowing wildly, pressing against my legs with frantic affection. I collapsed among them, laughing and sobbing at once, my body battered, but my heart blazing. The Guardians lowered their heads around us, wings folding into a circle that shut out the ruined sky. Together, they roared a sound not of grief this time, but of survival. I realized then that this wasn't the end of the fight. The galaxy would return again and again, but the pups would grow, the Guardians would rise, and maybe, just maybe, the story of one fool human and a handful of glowing orphans would spread like wildfire. Through the stars, a reminder, compassion is more dangerous than any weapon. That night, under a sky filled with broken stars, the smallest pup curled in my lap once more. I stroked its luminous fur and whispered, "You're safe. As long as I breathe, you're safe." And for the first time, I believed it.